US-backed Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny returned to Russia, and now he's stirring up all kinds of trouble there. He's got these mobs out into the streets, and we're seeing the exact same thing the US has been doing to countries all around the world, especially recently, like in Hong Kong and also right here in Thailand. And so we're seeing a lot of the same things going on, only the opposition in Russia is very weak. They're very weak and they're very unpopular, and that's because of the way Russia has dealt with the opposition there. Of course, in Hong Kong, the Chinese government let that play out, and now they have more or less permanently ended that with the Hong Kong national security law. So all of that is over, and what I'm trying to do here is show what's going on in Russia and maybe point out to Thailand some ideas that they might want to pick up and use if they want political stability in their country. So these protests have come out. This is from RT, which is Russian state media, and it's English media. So Russia can tell their side of the story instead of, giving the BBC, CNN, and others an absolute monopoly over the English-speaking audiences of the world. The title is Widespread Arrests and Dozens of Police Injured in Pro-Navalny Protests in Russia, as organizers say. More to come next weekend. Now, again, Alexei Navalny, he's one of these fake pro-democracy protesters who is always championing freedom, democracy, and human rights, and yet when his protesters come out into the streets, they're constantly violating and trampling all three. You will see a video, we'll get into this one a little later. Here's a police officer getting punched in the face. Okay, that's what they do. And I just want to point this out. This is how the Russian media reports on this. They will cite these NGOs, NGO OVD Info, an opposition resource that has received Western funding. When in Thailand have you ever seen the Bangkok Post, The Nation, or Khalsat English mention every single time they mention the name of one of these NGOs that it's funded by the US government or by the West? When have they ever done that? They always cite organizations like ILAW, Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, Pracha Thai, but they never say that they're funded by the West or that they're funded by the US government. They always leave that out as if it's not important. So that's the difference between the Russian English media and here in Thailand. And until that problem is solved, you can't solve anything else, because if people don't even really know what's going on, that the protests are not organic and spontaneous and self-organized, that they are being organized, funded, and directed by foreign interests, then you can't move to step 2 in solving this problem and establishing political stability. Now here, apparent anti-Navalny protester pulled down in Moscow lamppost during rally for holding sign objecting to activists. Again, these are protesters who say they're all for free speech. Now listen, when they pull him down, listen to the crowd of pro-democracy free speechers cheering that this man has been violently yanked down and silenced. Okay, so that's that, and that should be no surprise to anyone. If we were watching the mobs in Hong Kong claiming that they were these pro-democracy, pro-human rights champions, and yet every time they went out into the streets, there was violence, vandalism, attacks on anyone who disagreed with them or opposed them or tried to remain indifferent and uninvolved. They weren't even allowed to do that. Now, for people who are like, well, is Alexei Navalny really backed by the US? I mean, it is pretty obvious, but some people might still ask, what is the evidence? When I wrote this article about this poisoning incident where they claimed Alexei Navalny was poisoned by the Russian government with this Novichok, the deadliest nerve agent ever conceived by the human mind, yet he's totally fine and he's back in Russia organizing unrest in the streets. But before that, he was flown to Germany by this NGO who it's very hard to figure out who funds them. And they flew him to Germany specifically to create a problem regarding Nord Stream 2. This was about dropping him in the lap of the German government and wagging their finger at Germany saying, look, Russia just poisoned this opposition figure and you're going to keep doing this pipeline with Russia? How dare you? Well, Germany is continuing despite, and because that stunt didn't work, the US is using sanctions not only against Russian companies, but now also against German companies. So now their German allies are now the subject of US sanctions, just like Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and the list just keeps growing. But I want to point out his US backing. Alexei Navalny was a Yale World Fellow, and this was part of his bio, and they say Navalny is also co-founder of the Democratic Alternative Movement, and its nickname is Da, because Da means yes in Russian. And this was from WikiLeaks. You know, thank goodness for WikiLeaks. The US State Department itself revealed this as they list Da among the many youth movements they support operating in Russia. And they are talking about this woman who is also involved in Da, and they said she has received funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, a fact she does not publicize for fear of appearing compromised by an American connection. Now, of course, the National Endowment for Democracy, the board of directors of the NED, are people who have been involved in some of the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. These are people who literally participated in the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Scott Carpenter was part of the provisional interim government that the US had to set up in Iraq after they murdered everyone in the Iraqi government or forced them to flee or arrested them. They actually had white guys running the country there for a while, like viceroys from the British Empire. And so, yes, if you're taking NED money, yes, you are definitely compromised. You are a foreign agent working for the US. You are working for people who have destroyed countries, and now you're helping them to undermine and potentially destroy your country. So I just thought I would point all of that out. I'd also like to point out that Russia has very strict NGO laws that help control what the NED can and cannot do in their country. Whatever they do, it's very transparent. Everyone knows it. There's no iLaw or Thai Lawyers for Human Rights or Pracha Thai that are able to open their mouth constantly and be cited in the news constantly without constantly being exposed as being agents for the US government. That does not happen in Russia. That happens in Thailand because the English media here in Thailand does not report that. And a lot of the Thai media also does not report that, even though it's essential. It's essential. So I just thought I would point that out. I'd point out how Russia is dealing with these protests, and I'm going to continue covering this. I have been covering Alexei Navalny, his poisoning, his return to Russia, and now these protests that are being carried out by opposition groups behind him. So I'm going to continue doing that. To my Patreon patrons who make these videos possible on a day-to-day basis, thank you so much for that support. Please like and share the video if you thought it was useful. Think about subscribing to the channel. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. And to everyone everywhere helping me in absolutely every way, thank you so much. I couldn't do it without that support. And as always, thank you for watching.